Rex Heuermann is the suspect behind 3 or 4 of the Long Island serial killings, and of course, he is entitled to a presumption of innocence. At the same time, what is the psychological profile behind a serial killer like this? What kind of a mind is behind these horrific crimes?
Thank you for joining us today. I'm Lainey Law.
And I'm attorney Andrew Myers.
And today we're going to be looking into some of the psychological aspects behind these incredible, over a decade-long cases involving Rex Heuermann as a suspect. So now, Andrew, I have some questions for you today.
Well, before we get to the questions, I just want to tell our viewers that if they haven't seen episode 1 of our Heuermann series, they should go back and look at that first, and we will link it down in the comments. But sure, go ahead. What are your questions?
So my question for you today is, because I think for a lot of people watching this, we can't really empathize. I mean, sometimes we say we want to heal someone when we're mad, but we can't actually empathize the mind that goes behind doing these calculated attacks. Is there a personality type that fits serial killers? Like, what exactly is happening in these cases?
Well, unfortunately, there have been a lot of different serial killers at this point, and unfortunately, that has been grist for the mill for psychologists, and there are several different personality types, but there is some general agreement.
The most common sexual motive for serial killings is sexual sadism. Becoming the god to that victim is the offender's primal goal.
And so as we look at serial killers, they're generally a pattern of conduct that's consistent with the serial sexual homicide. This breaks down into a couple of categories. There's the organized and the disorganized. It may not be as simple as you think. The slick, organized, psychopathic serial killers are scheming. They can be very charming, like Ted Bundy was, who could charm or lure a victim in a very organized way. Then there is the disorganized type. It's a more chaotic type. They might be seriously mental ill. They might actually hear voices or have delusions, which is one of the things that drives them.
Mm-hmm. And now you mentioned that some of these cases are more, organized, and some of them are more disorganized and almost impromptu. Are there significant distinctions between these two types of behavioral patterns?
Well, the first type, the more organized type, there's a subcategory, as I had said before, the Ted Bundy type that was more organized. And he was a charming fellow. I mean, even Ann Rule, the great true crime author, was charmed by him and invited him over for dinner. The second type of organized serial killer is not so charming, and they're not necessarily able to quote unquote lure a victim and have them feel comfortable with them, at least at the outset. And this is a more organized but plotting type of a serial killer. And they, since they can't attract their victims, they might prey on prostitutes, sex workers, and that type of thing. And they might be that because they are not physically attractive. So speculation among some is that Rex Heuermann falls into this latter category. Although bear in mind, as we go through all of this, psychologists and sociologists and all the rest can really speculate at this time, but that's all they're doing, because as with some of the other serial killers that we are more familiar with, Mr. Heuermann at this point is denying any involvement as we do this podcast today, and he also has not been interviewed. Thirdly, we do not know the specific cause of death or the specific gesticulations that he went through to cause the death. It was said that of the 4 victims, 3 of which he's been charged with, and the 4th we believe he was tied in with, although we don't know. The hyoid bone was fractured, which indicates that there may well have been a choking. But most of this is speculation, so it's hard to give a hard diagnosis right now.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to serial killers and murderers, a lot of the time we hear psychopath and sociopath thrown around. What do these words mean, and do they fit into this case at all?
Well, that is a really somewhat controversial area in psychology, and we have to take a look at those two words. We quite frequently hear sociopath or psychopath, and traditionally a psychopath was someone who was thought to know the difference between right and wrong, but didn't care. A psychopath was thought to be someone that doesn't know the difference between right and wrong. That was the classic difference. A sociopath was believed that people were born as blank slates, and then subsequently, as the environment went forward, they were shaped by their environment or social forces, ultimately resulting in a good or a bad personality. On the other hand, a psychopath, symptoms of psychopathy generally appear in early childhood and impact all areas of that person's life, including relationships with family, friends, at school, and at work. These people display a high level of unemotionalism, callousness, and as well as impulsiveness or development of antisocial traits such as destructive or aggressive behavior. So again, the traditional terms of sociopathy and psychopathy were that in sociopathy, there was an antisocial personality disorder that developed environmentally as the person went through life, whereas psychopathy involved an individual in which something went wrong physiologically. There's a physiological base for it. All of these terms have pretty much been rejected at this point in modern psychology by the DSMs. A pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of others is now considered a personality disorder, or a personality disorder that has a couple of different factors to it. A pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of others since the age of 15, indicated by 3 or 4 more of the following, indicates that someone has a personality disorder. So the factors that 3 or more indicate this diagnosis are failure to obey laws and norms by engaging in behavior which results in criminal arrest or would warrant criminal arrest, lying, deception, and manipulation for profit or self-amusement, impulsive behavior, irritability and aggression manifested as frequently assaults others or engages in fighting, blatantly disregards safety of self and others, a pattern of irresponsibility, and a lack of remorse as indicated by being indifferent to or rationalizing having hurt, mistreated, or stolen from another person. So those are some of the factors, 3 of which lead to this diagnosis. The other diagnostic criteria, though, notably, are that the person has to be at least age 18. So these diagnoses cannot apply to a minor. Conduct disorder was present by a history before age 15. So these are traits that exist as the person is growing up, but can't be diagnosed until age 18. And the antisocial behavior does not occur in the context of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, which, as you know, are 2 totally different diagnoses. And again, these are the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or DSMs, in the most recent DSMs put out by the American Psychiatric Association. So that's a new way of looking at sociopaths and those who have other disorders. And that's the current way of looking at this.
Mm-hmm. And also, like, for people listening at home, we're not talking about, maybe you do something to hurt someone's feelings every once in a while. This is more like repeated patterns of behavior. Some people relate or, use the description of like kids torturing animals in childhood and not having that kind of empathy. And like we mentioned before, like disregard for the law. So, it's just like you may like blunder, you may like say like, heck this one time, gonna do something, maybe turn left on a no left turn sign or something like that. But this is, repeated patterns of disregard. Now, where would you say that Rex fits into this? Do we have an answer on that, on, was this part of his upbringing? Do we think that something's just
Your last
wrong?
point was a really good point,
Yeah.
that these are patterns of behavior, as was indicated in the DSMs. These are patterns of behavior. If you do, if a young person does a bad thing once or twice, that's not really developing a pattern of behavior, but repeated behavior or extreme behavior, like you pointed out, torturing animals. That's something that, oddly enough, some of the serial killers, a number of the serial killers, have in their past, and it's disturbing. But that's one of the reasons that these are patterns that need to be observed, usually prior to the age of 15, but the diagnosis doesn't come until the age of 18. With respect to Mr. Heuerman, it is difficult because we don't know his entire history at this point. We can deduce only from what has been seen, from the fact that he was so organized to find these victims. He was very methodical in his manner of finding these people. It wasn't just something that happened on the spur of the moment. He used burner cell phones, which shows thought in advance. He had this burlap material in which he wrapped the bodies. So it's very difficult to make that distinction without really having a full history of his upbringing, but also more of exactly what the manner and cause of death were in these cases.
Mm-hmm. Now, I guess something that I'm sure a lot of people are wondering about this case too is that, like we talked about patterns of behavior, all of these bodies that are found are over, a decade old. So it almost just seems that if it were Mr. Heuerman, that it almost just stopped. So why are all these are all these cases so old? Like, did he just quit his behavior?
That is a mystery, in that, yes, these four horrible, unfortunate cases occurred, we believe, in 2007, 2008, 2009, and then all of that time went by. We don't know. Again, there are 6 more cases that are out there that we don't know what happened with those bodies. Interestingly, with the Green River Killer out in Seattle, Gary Ridgway, he had performed a number of murders on sex workers out in the Seattle-Tacoma area. And then he stopped for a period of time. By history, we learned that he got married a 3rd time, and the 3rd marriage was somewhat pleasant. And he went on with his life for a period of time. But then when that relationship broke down, he started again. So if Mr. Heuerman did stop, and that's very unlikely because usually this is compulsive behavior, something that someone has something inside of them that pushes them to do. But if he did stop, then he changed his manner of operation, in that, from what we know from the investigation, he was using these specific burner phones, and he was calling these people from specific locations. And he had the modus operandi of wrapping those victims in a particular type of material like burlap. So if he stopped, it's very unusual. If he continued, there may have been a brief period of time in which he stopped, but then when he started up again, he must have disposed of the bodies in a different way or a different place or a different manner. We don't know that yet.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that you bring up that other case where, he was going for a while, got into seemingly a good relationship and stopped. Are there any other cases with serial killers that are kind of comparable to how Mr. Heuerman's been behaving?
Well, they're all a little bit different, but I mean, Ted Bundy was a very charming guy. He grew up in Seattle, and he, was part of society. He knew the mayor, and he was actually coming up through the lower ranks of the Republican Party. He was a law student, et cetera, et cetera. So it doesn't really relate that much to any of them. The John Wayne Gacy was a somewhat unique case in that Mr. Gacy also was a contractor, and although he had done some time in jail, and so there's a diagnosis point, he came out and he became a contractor, and he, was involved in the JCs. He was the JC of the year. And so it's hard to categorize them together, but there are similarities between them.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned, those similarities. I guess I'm curious because with Mr. Heuermann, there seems to be different accounts of, his working career. Some people say that, he seemed to be like an up and coming like business person, but there's, other stories as well where maybe some questionable things were going on. What do we know about his background?
We don't know a lot about his background, but I'm looking for the quote we have here that one of the neighbors said that he was, and here's the quote. People who knew or have interacted with Heuermann have provided a wide range of descriptors about his personality, including joking and goofy, but also quiet, talkative, arrogant, and creepy. Mm-hmm. One of the neighbors said not only was he creepy, but also he was a nasty person. So these are just observations that obviously are very subjective, but when you get more than one or two of them, it goes from subjective into the territory of objective. So the odd thing about Ted Bundy and John Wayne Gacy and Rex Heuermann and all the rest is that these are people that are living amongst us. And my question is, how do you know? I mean, he rode into the city from Long Island on the Long Island Railroad every day. He walked amongst the people in the masses in New York City. And I know you, as have I, have worked in the city. So you walk around on the city streets, whether you're going for lunch or you're walking to the office, walking to the train station. He walked amongst us. He walked amongst us. He was walking the same streets. Ted Bundy was driving his car in the parks out in Washington State, and then in the other states that he went to. Gary Ridgway was amongst us. Dennis Rader, the BTK, was actually very well known in his community and in his church. And he was a social figure, and it just shocked everyone. So that's a striking feature of many of these, not all of these featured people, although Mr. Heuermann was said to be creepy and not very nice. He was living amongst us, or living amongst the people down in Long Island and in New York City. Very strange.
And how you mentioned like there's all these different accounts. He's quiet, he's talkative. I think that obviously innocent until proven guilty, but at the same time I think there goes a bit to say when you have someone who's seemingly getting all these different things said about them, which I'm someone, everybody's going to say whatever they want about me, but it's almost like if somebody, like if you're trying to please someone, obviously you're going to act a certain way. So it's kind of interesting that maybe certain people got the better side when he wanted to impress them, but then to other people, he was a little bit more cold and more concerned about his own well-being than trying to impress other people. Now, another thing that was interesting about this case is that, and I don't know how this compares to other cases, but all of his victims were rather petite, small, women or alleged victims, around 5 foot or smaller. Is that a consistent thing across other cases where they start to look for a certain type?
This is called surrogate victimhood or prototype victimhood, where again, we don't know in this case, but something has gone wrong in the person's life. As with Gary Ridgway, he had a very bizarre upbringing that's for a whole different episode. But Gary Ridgway, who also preyed on sex workers, had a prototype, and he would pick up women of the same general characteristics. Because when Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, it's hard to keep them all straight. There's so many of them.
Unfortunately, but yeah.
As he was growing up, there was a very bizarre relationship with his mother. He was a bedwetter, and then she would clean his parts. And he had very odd, strange, unusual feelings for his mother at a very difficult time in his life. And so it is thought that his acting out on women was his having a prototype They became surrogates that he needed to act upon. And so whether this is the case with Rex Heuermann, we don't know the facts. But again, as you pointed out, the 4 victims that we know about, 3 that he's charged with, 1 that he hasn't been charged with at this time, they're all petite. They're all attractive young women. They're all, I believe, 5 feet or less. And they're all between the ages of 22 and 27. So exactly what it was in his youth, we don't exactly know. All you know is that one of his parents died when he was 10 years old. And what the triggering mechanism was to have all of this happen is not known. But yes, there is in a lot of serial murderers, there is a type. Ted Bundy liked the, generally, not always, generally liked the brunettes that also tended to be young. In his case, one was underage, one was in her 30s. But in any event, yes, there's generally speaking a prototype.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned like the relationship, like having a mother, in that kind of scenario. Do you think that Heuermann had some type of connection or relationship with his victims? Do you think that he's emulating something, or do you think that these are kind of one-off situations?
He it is likely, from what we know, that he did try to be pleasant to them. A lot of serial killers have a godlike fantasy where they're able to actually let a couple of victims go, and that makes them feel so much better that, oh, look, I let somebody go, and then that person goes and fortunately talks to the police. But they have this godlike character that they feel that they are able to have life or death. There's a theory known as introjection. That is when a person that you know dies, there's a desire to somehow include that person, if even only an image, into yourself. That's why people go to funerals and tell stories and remember the person. And oddly, they say that's why people always eat after a funeral, because that's bringing part of that person into your body. That's why there are certain rites in Christianity and Catholicism. If you suffer from a major loss and there is a refusal to leave the house from your childhood, for example, Mr. Heuermann still lived in the house in Massapequa where he had grown up in. He had refused to do anything to the house. There have been other serial killers that have, they have this theory of introjection, or this feeling of introjection, where they don't want to let it go. Somebody in their life has died, and so they can't let it go, and so they don't want to touch the house.
Mm-hmm.
This also comes through in terms of the fact that there was a child-sized doll that was taken out of that house, and he had a parent die at the age of 10. He did some awful internet searches, which we didn't go into. We did in another episode in the Brian Walsh case. In this episode, we didn't go into that, but there was a series of just awful internet searches that he did about children. One was a child being taken advantage of by a janitor. One was a 10-year-old girl. And so these are all things that are very unique to certain psychologies, and the theory of introjection goes into the fact that serial killers do want to, often spend some time with this victim and bring that person's psyche into their own. As bizarre as that sounds, we're talking about a bizarre bunch of people.
Yeah, I'm like getting like the shivers. I got like goosebumps right now. I don't know if you could see it on the camera, but
I'm sorry.
It's like the idea of like trying to take these people and almost become a part of it is very unsettling and strange.
Isn't it?
But
Very strange. Yeah.
now I guess, I mean, I'm a little freaked out about this. I'm very fortunate to really not be able to empathize with this. This isn't like something that ever crosses my mind. Not that I'm ever thinking about. I think a lot of people, when you listen to true crime stories, you start thinking like, oh, could I get away with it? But you're not actually thinking of acting on it. It's just more like you see the things that people do wrong and you think you can do better than them. And, obviously with no intent behind it. Or maybe you don't even imagine that. Maybe I'm the crazy one thinking is just like, wow, all these little details that like just slipped through. But all that being said, now, is there anything that I have not asked you that you would like to touch upon, Andrew?
Just that it's odd to think, as I said before, that these people can be amongst us. Ted Bundy was a charming young man, and John Wayne Gacy, although problematic in earlier years, was a working contractor in Chicago, and he was able to go out and do jobs. And so it's difficult with all the time and energy and thought that has gone into, decades, if not a century of psychology, going back through Freudian, the behaviorists, B.F. Skinner, all the rest to 5 versions of DSMs. And we're still not able to pick these people out in school, in social groups. Maybe we don't have social groups anymore. Maybe that's part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
But with all the time and effort and money and focus and attention, people are not able to identify these people before they go out and act out and cause the horrible crimes that they crime. So that's something that always strikes me. And, it's bone chilling, and it does give you goosebumps to think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do think there's definitely various elements of it. But anyway, all that being said, thank you guys so much for watching today's episode. If you made it this far, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one.
You have been watching About the Law, a production of the law offices of Andrew D. Myers in Methuen in the Merrimack Valley of Massachusetts and in Derry, just outside of Manchester, New Hampshire. Remember to click the like and subscribe buttons down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to share it with your friends and others. If you'd like to talk to me about an injury case, a car accident, a slip and fall, a serious bodily injury case, or some other case, please feel free to contact me. I'd love to talk to you. You can contact us through my website at attorney-myers.com. We have a contact us block, or you can call on one of the telephone numbers we've given there, or you can email me at andrew@attorney-myers.com. The foregoing is offered for informational purposes only. It is not intended as and does not constitute legal advice. Laws vary widely from state to state. You should rely only on the advice given to you during a personal consultation by a local attorney thoroughly familiar with state laws and the area of practice in which your concern lies. This podcast must be and hereby is labeled advertisement in some jurisdictions.